sudden, because of this instantaneous information, we can still get to that same level. We can still collaborate much faster. We can still join and put pieces of the puzzle together. And so what turned out to be what's supposed to be a tool of darkness, we end up turning into a tool of light and awakening millions and millions of people around the planet. So all of a sudden, it's like they're getting this knowledge too quick. They're going to be going now, backtracking. These are the ancient sites that are given. We're going to continue to fund you under the table, but we need you to go in and demolish all these ancient artifacts, because these artifacts are proof of ancient advanced civilizations, ancient advanced technology, and also a system that was put in place to enslave mankind for...
Yes, that's Billy Carson back again, this time delving into the mysteries surrounding the Library of Alexandria and the efforts to keep its knowledge hidden. The library was a great storehouse of knowledge, a true super library of its time. Built around 300 BC, it thrived for about 600 years. Archaeologists believe it held over 500,000 scrolls made of papyrus, including works by famed thinkers like Plato, Aristotle, Homer, and Herodotus. Unfortunately, by the 400 AD, the library had been lost to the sands of time. Many scrolls were stolen, destroyed, or simply forgotten.
Teachings. So they must control and hide and secure evidence of this information and this knowledge to keep people basically in this level of ignorance where they can continue to control them and steal their money.
What secrets have they kept about the destruction of the library? And what terrifying truths did we just learn? Join us as we expose the bitter truth behind the tragic loss of knowledge in the ancient world. Before talking about the library, it's essential to mention the city which hosted it. In 1331 BC, Alexander the Great built the city of Alexandria near the mouth of the Nile River in Egypt. After his death, his empire was divided among his military leaders. One of these leaders, Ptolemy I Soter, became the ruler of Egypt and made Alexandria his capital city. Under his rule, and the rule of his family members who came after him, Alexandria became a vital and wealthy city during the Hellenistic period from 323 BC to 30 BC. It was a busy center of trade and a major port on the Mediterranean Sea. Here is the beginning of controversies. Sit tight and enjoy. According to Willek Wendrick, an expert on ancient Egypt, the library was built shortly after Alexandria was founded, around 331 BC. However, it's still being determined exactly who started the library. It could have been Alexander the Great, or those who reigned after him, Ptolemy I or Ptolemy I's son, Ptolemy II. Most historians agree that it was most likely built during the era of Ptolemy II, which lasted from 284 BC to 246 BC. Most historians also agree that an advisor to Ptolemy started the idea of the library named Demetrius of Phalerum. Demetrius, who came from Athens, suggested building a place to store copies of all the writings known in the world at the time. His idea was to create a center of learning as impressive as Aristotle's famous Lyceum, which was a school and library near Athens. Ptolemy I liked this idea, and a building was soon constructed inside the palace grounds. The building was called the Museon, which means places of the muses, explained Wendrich. The muses were the 9 Greek goddesses of the arts, and that's where our word museum comes from. According to Britannica, the first head librarian was believed to be Zenodotus, a scholar and poet from Ephesus, Greece. He served as a chief librarian for both Ptolemy I and Ptolemy II. Zenodotus is known for creating the very first edited version of Homer's epic poems, the Iliad and the Odyssey. His work aimed to figure out which parts were originally written by Homer and which bits were added by other writers later on. Zenodotus wasn't just an editor, he also edited works by other famous ancient poets like Hesiod and Pindar, and he even wrote his poetry. The impressive efforts of the royal house in expanding the library from a one-building structure to a cluster of buildings will inspire you. The librarian felt the need to expand the library both structurally and in the quality of books. Thanks to the Ptolemy rulers who shared in his vision for a need to expand the place of learning and culture in their city, they gave generous financial support, which was used to build a cluster of buildings around the initial museum. We were still determining exactly what the library looked like. Still, according to an ancient historian named Diodorus Siculus, at its peak, it had rooms for lectures, labs, meetings, gardens, areas for eating, and even a zoo. There was even a medical school where students learned by dissecting natural human bodies, a feat that was only achieved in Europe much later, around the 15th century Renaissance. Willich Wendrich, an expert on ancient Egypt, explained that the Museum was a different museum that we know them today. Instead, it functioned more like a university for live science and arts. People would gather there, listen to readings of literature, share their thoughts, and discuss different ideas. But the real shocker is the brilliance of those who stored the books. Do you know that the books were made in scrolls? Let's learn more about this fantastic ancient book storing system. The books at the time were written in scrolls. According to certain historians, the library's collection of scrolls were stored in a separate building from the museum, although it's only partially certain. Remember the cluster of houses that the royal family funded? The books were probably hushed in one of those properties. At its peak, the library held an incredible amount of scrolls. According to the World History Encyclopedia estimates, there were up to 500,000 scrolls. These scrolls were made from papyrus, a plant that grew abundantly along the Nile River. As Dartmouth College explains, papyrus reeds were flattened and dried in the sun to create a certain kind of paper. Then these sheets were glued together to form long, continuous scrolls that could be rolled up for easy storage. Wait for the most genius part though. Egyptologist Wendrich also added that the scrolls covered a massive range of subjects, basically everything people knew in the ancient world. This included works of literature and philosophy and even attempts to explain the natural world through science, which we can call early physics and chemistry textbooks. There were also scrolls on religion, myths, astrology, astronomy, and even medicine. The library also held a huge collection of scrolls containing works by famous Greek writers from ancient times. These included philosophers like Plato, Aristotle, and Pythagoras, as well as playwrights like Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides. In fact, according to Britannica, Aristotle's works were precious and one of the most consulted authors in the library. Some historians also supported this claim and added that King Ptolemy II paid a very high price to acquire them. The quest for knowledge of the ancient Egyptians will shock you. They didn't limit themselves to Greek works. They also collected scrolls from other cultures, including ancient Egyptian, Babylonian, Persian, Assyrian, and Indian writings. We would soon tell a fascinating story of how zealous they were to get their hands on books. According to some experts, there were even religious texts from Judaism, Zoroastrianism, and Buddhism. The Ptolemy rulers were determined to gather every written work they could find. They sent agents all over the known world on a giant scroll hunt. These agents were instructed to buy up any scrolls they could find, especially the oldest and most original ones. According to ancient history, money wasn't an issue, and the Ptolemies were willing to pay top quality gold for high quality scrolls. Do you want to know how desperate they were to get top quality publications? Here's the story. During the reign of Ptolemy III, any ship entering Alexandria's harbor had to hand over any scrolls they had on board. Scribes in the library would then copy the scrolls, keeping the originals and sending the copies back with the ships. This way, they built their collection without having to pay for the originals. That is not the end of their ingenuity. Just like libraries today have systems for finding books quickly, the Library of Alexandria had a way to organize its massive scroll collection. A scholar named Callimachus, who worked under Ptolemy II, was given the task of organizing the scrolls. He created a system called the Pinakes, which means tables in Greek. Through this system, he sorted the scrolls into categories based on their topics, such as history, science, literature, law, and medicine. This was very similar to how libraries use catalogs today, and according to historians, it became the inspiration for many other library organization systems that came later. In addition to being sorted by category, each scroll also had a tag with information like the title, author, and whether it contained a single work or multiple works. That's not all though. As the library's collection kept growing, the scrolls became so much that they couldn't all fit in one building anymore. The ancient Egyptian rulers built a second library called the Serapeum to hold all the extras. This new library was built near the royal palace in Alexandria sometime between 246 BC and 222 BC, and it was dedicated to a god called Serapis, who was a mix of Greek and Egyptian deities. The Serapeum is said to have housed over 40,000 scrolls. His ever-growing library became a magnet for the most brilliant minds of the ancient world. Famous scholars, philosophers, and scientists flocked to Alexandria to study and share their knowledge. Some of the big names who came to the library included Eratosthenes, Aristarchus, Euclid, and Apollonius. Aristarchus was another big name in astronomy. He had a groundbreaking idea that the sun, not Earth, was at the center of everything, a concept called the heliocentric model. Euclid, often called the father of geometry, wrote a famous book called Elements that's still influential in the world of math today. Apollonius in Rhodes wasn't just a scholar, he was also a poet known for a long poem about Jason and the Argonauts, a famous Greek mythology story. All their published works were available in the library. It's difficult to estimate the knowledge lost to the library, but we can draw some estimates from historical texts. For example, Eratosthenes, the brilliant scholar who also served as the head librarian in Alexandria, was able to determine that the earth was round and even calculated its circumference. Under his position and the library's resources, Eratosthenes made a key observation. Alexandria and Syene, another Egyptian city, were both located along the same north-south line. By carefully measuring the distance between the two towns and factoring the angle cast by the sun on the summer solstice, Eratosthenes was able to estimate Earth's circumference. He concluded it was around 252,000 stadia. This means that Eratosthenes' calculation placed Earth's circumference between 39,060 kilometers and 40,320 kilometers, remarkably close to the actual value of around 40,075 kilometers. But that's not all. Even centuries later, Eratosthenes' work on Earth's circumference was acknowledged by scholars like Claudius Ptolemy and Marinus of Tyre in 2nd century AD. However, by late antiquity, his work has been lost. This partial rediscovery of Eratosthenes' work shows that impressive level of mathematical materials stored at the Library of Alexandria. This is further supported by a recent discovery. Ancient scientists knew combinatorics, a branch of mathematics previously thought to be much more modern. Plutarch, a writer from ancient Greece, mentioned a debate between two mathematicians, Chrysippus and Hipparchus. Chrysippus believed that there were over 1 million ways to combine 10 simple statements, but Hipparchus countered with a precise calculation of 103,049. Incredibly, it was only in 1994 that we realized Hipparchus' number was the 10th Schroeder number. In simple terms, it's the exact number of ways to bracket a sequence of 10 symbols. This discovery shows that mathematicians like Hipparchus were tackling and solving complex problems as early as 120 BC, and the library held all their published materials. Hipparchus, a true polymath, made significant contributions to various scientific fields. However, his most groundbreaking work was likely in astronomy. After his death, the study of astronomy seems to have slowed down until the 1st century. All his published materials in astronomy were lost to the library. If you think that's all was lost, wait for more shocking revelations. Seleucus is also credited with being among the first to propose an infinite universe. Sadly, none of his original writings have survived the destruction of the library. And what we perceive as backward motion is simply an illusion. The exact source of these ideas is unknown, but many scholars believe they might have come from the work of Hipparchus, the famous polymath from the 2nd century BC. Writings also suggest that Hipparchus developed a theory of binocular vision, almost 2,000 years before the invention of the telescope. He also developed a mathematical model for a heliocentric system using the sun as a center, even though he couldn't fully establish the truth of his findings. One astronomer who did believe in a heliocentric system was Seleucus of Seleucia, a contemporary of Hipparchus. According to Strabo, another ancient writer, Seleucus studied the tides and used the idea of both the sun and moon to explain his observations. Lucio Russo, a modern scholar, suggests in his book The Forgotten Revolution that Seleucus' work on tides might have led him to the concept that the Earth and Moon revolve around a common center rather than the Earth being stationary. Do you remember Euclid of Alexandria? We mentioned earlier that he made giant strides in the field of mathematics, and his book Elements is still one of the most influential ever written on mathematics. However, despite his legacy, much of his research appears to be lost in the Library of Alexandria. Historians estimate that half of his work, including essential books on mechanics and the study of conic sections, might have yet to survive. The Library of Alexandria also housed works on optics. Interestingly, some of the early works of Euclid on optics survived, but they represent just a fraction. Later works by Claudius Ptolemy are incomplete attempts to recover his lost portion. Some historians also suggest that Euclid's works on optics were far ahead of their time. The extent to which the field of medicine suffered in the destruction of the library will leave you shocked. The medical field suffered so much that it took over 1,000 years for medicine to catch up with the knowledge lost to the Library of Alexandria. One of the most influential figures in ancient medicine was Herophilus, often called the father of anatomy. Although none of his writings survive today, they're frequently mentioned by later physicians. Historians also believe that he was the first person recorded to dissect human cadavers. Herophilus conducted extensive research on various parts of the body, including the heart and circulatory system, the nervous system, the digestive system, and the reproductive system. In his book, Midwifery, he provided detailed descriptions of the female reproductive organs, pregnancy, and childbirth process. This book aimed to dispel myths surrounding female reproduction, making childbirth and treatment of related illnesses easier. Herophilus' curiosity extended beyond the physical body. He also showed interest in mental health, the interpretation of dreams, and the importance of healthy living. Unfortunately, we only have fragments of his works today, most of which are gotten from the works of other scholars who read his books. There is a lot of controversy over the destruction of the library. Let's look into the claims one by one, and at the end, tell us who you think should be held responsible for the destruction of the library. Historians like Plutarch and Seneca claim that Julius Caesar was responsible for a fire that eventually destroyed the entire library. For a long time, many historians believe this story. The fire broke out in 48 BC when Caesar was fighting a civil war that took control of Alexandria. According to this version of the story, Caesar's army was surrounded by his enemies, and he ordered them to set fire to enemy ships in the harbor. Historian Plutarch wrote that Caesar had to use fire to stop the enemy, but the flames spread from the docks and burned down the great library. While these older accounts place the blame on Julius Caesar, most historians today believe this is an exaggeration. But this is just the beginning of controversies. Sit tight. There was a fire during Caesar's war in Alexandria, but it likely didn't cause much damage to the library itself. Some scrolls might have been destroyed, but not all. There's evidence to support this view. For instance, a Roman historian named Cassius Dio wrote that a building for scrolls near the docks burned down during the conflict, but the library itself remained unharmed. Other historians point out that scholars who visited Alexandria later, like Strabo, mentioned using the library's collection in their work. This suggests the library survived the fire. Willich Wendrich believes that the Library of Alexandria didn't disappear in one big event. It went through a slow decline over many centuries. Most historians today agree with this view. Instead of a sudden destruction, the library's status and collection slowly dwindled. Over time, some scrolls were sold or lost, and the library buildings themselves were eventually torn down or converted for other uses, like churches or mosques. While the library declined gradually, some events also sped up the process. Let's look at these shocking events. One example was the reign of Ptolemy VIII, who ruled from 182 BC to 116 BC. Ptolemy VIII kicked out a lot of scholars, including the head librarian at the time. These scholars were on the opposing side in a political power struggle. He even forced all scholars who weren't from Alexandria to leave the city. This created a tense and unstable situation, and many scholars left Alexandria altogether. Some went to Athens and Rhodes, taking their knowledge with them. This definitely hurt the reputation of the library as a center of learning. Another blow that caused more damage was religion. For instance, in 391 AD, a Roman emperor called Theodosius I, who was a strong Christian, ordered the destruction of pagan temples throughout the empire. The bishop of Alexandria at the time, Theophilus, followed these orders and tore down the Serapeum library and replaced it with a church on top of the ruins. This was one of the many setbacks. In 297 AD, another Roman emperor, Diocletian, laid siege to Alexandria and ransacked the city. A bishop named John of Nicaea wrote that Diocletian even set fire to the entire city. Events like these caused further destruction to the library and its buildings. Beyond the gradual decline and other events we have discussed, the biggest reason for the downfall of the library was probably the city of Alexandria itself losing its importance as a center of learning. Other cities like Rome and Athens were becoming significant centers for scholars and academics, and they even had impressive libraries. Alexandria also lost its importance in culture and trade. Political and economic troubles, along with social unrest, made the later Ptolemaic rulers less interested in funding and maintaining the library. Willick Wendrich explains that the library's fortunes changed over time. Some rulers valued the library and supported it, while others did little to help it. There were no more construction funds to expand it. Scholars were sent away from the city. Alexandria itself became a hub for military and political adventures, and the library slowly lost its purpose. By the time the Arab Caliphate conquered Alexandria in the 17th century AD, the library was nothing but a forgotten memory, according to the World History Encyclopedia. There is a story, though, written much later in the 13th century that claims the Arab leader Omar destroyed the remaining scrolls. The story goes that Omar said the scrolls either contradicted Islamic teachings or repeated what was already known in the Quran. Hence, they weren't necessary and weren't supposedly burned to heat public baths. However, most historians today don't believe this story. The loss of the Great Library of Alexandria is a big deal to historians and scientists because so much knowledge must have been lost with it. It's impossible to know for sure what was in the library since there's no complete record of its collection. But we know forever is that the world can never recover the knowledge that was lost with it. Who do you blame for the loss of this library? The fire of Julius Caesar, lack of funds by the royal house, the eviction of the intellects, or the action of the Christians and Arab Muslims? Let's share your thoughts in the comments section. Thank you for joining us today. If you love this content and want more, remember to like the video and subscribe to this channel.